For Sunday service today, we're going to start in the book of John, chapter 16, and then we're going to go to the book of Acts, chapter 27, starting with verse 14. And I'd like to think about this morning about how we serve God in the middle of a storm in our lives. You know, Jesus promised that in this life we would have tribulations. I'm going to read John chapter 16, verse 33. These things have I spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Jesus looked at his disciples, and he told them, I'm telling you these things, I'm giving you my words that you might have peace in this world. If you go back to John chapter 14, verses 26 and 27, he tells us that he gives us his peace. But he promises us something. He says, in this world ye shall have tribulation. And how are we supposed to respond to that? He says, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Because Jesus has overcome the world, I can be of good cheer. And I want to ask us ourselves today, if that's how we handle the serious trials and tribulations that come upon us in life. And I want to use as an example the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts. Now I'm going to give you a little background here. The Apostle Paul had been arrested in Acts chapter 21, and he had been arrested in Jerusalem, and he had been put in jail. And for the past 2 years, he had been a prisoner, and he had been able to witness to kings and rulers and everyone he came in contact with. Anyone that would listen, he was telling them about Jesus. But he was still a prisoner. He was in jail. And he finally appeals unto Caesar because there were people trying to kill him. And since he was a Roman citizen, he had a right to appeal to Caesar. So he appealed unto Caesar, and they put him in a boat and start sending him towards Rome. And we're going to pick that up in Acts chapter 27, and we're going to start with verse 14. Now, you know, after you've been a prisoner for 2 years, you wonder how things could get any worse. And I don't know whether you've ever had those situations in life where you wondered whether things could get worse or not. And then they do. And that's exactly what we find with Paul. He's already a prisoner, and now he's on a boat, and he's being sent to stand before Caesar. And he gets caught in a typhoon. Acts chapter 27, verse 14, it says, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Now, that word means an eastern storm. It was a typhoon that had winds blowing in every direction. And it says the ship was caught up and it couldn't bear to the wind, so they just had to let it drive. They put cables around the ship to try to hold it together. You got to remember these were wooden boats, wooden ships. And this storm went on for days and days and days, about 2 weeks. But verse 18, Acts chapter 27, verse 18 through 20 says this. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay upon us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. And I don't know whether you've ever reached that point in a trial that all hope that you was going to be saved was taken away. That you didn't see the end at all. There didn't seem to be any way that your life could be spared, that the trouble could go away. It just seemed impossible. That's where he was. All hope that they could be saved was taken away. But I want you to notice something in this scripture. You know, Paul was a man of God. What was he doing in all this time when the days when they didn't see sun or stars and they were lost at sea and the storm was just tossing up over the boat and rocking them back and forth? Well, verse 21 says, after long abstinence, let me say that right. I see Paul fasting and praying. And he wasn't just praying for himself, and he wasn't praying that God would deliver him by himself. He was praying for all of those on the boat, in the ship with him. He stands up and he tells the people, in the midst of the storm, verse 22, Acts chapter 27, verse 22. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, he says. Storm still raging. I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. He says, I want you to be of good cheer, because everybody's life's going to be saved, but the ship's going to be a wreck. Verse 23, for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. He said, God sent an angel. Now, why do you think God had to send an angel? Well, my opinion is there was so much going on in this storm that the winds were raging, and the waves were coming over the boat, and it was storming and blowing and tossing and turning, and there was so much commotion going on that it was hard to hear what God was saying. It was hard to get your answer from God. And Paul was praying and waiting on an answer. So God sent an angel, so he got that answer face to face. He sends answers in the midst of your storm. Pray. Wait on the answer. He sent an angel. And this is what the angel said, verse 24. Saying, fear not, Paul. You know, he was afraid. Natural thing to be. Thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. And you know, some of those men that sailed with him were guards that would have killed him. But he prayed for them too. God save them. And God gave him all those people. Verse 25 says this, wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, and it shall be even as was told me. I believe God. It's going to be like he said. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Verse 27 says, and when the 14th night was come, there was 2 weeks of this storm. God comes to him, he says, fear not, Paul, I'm going to save your life. You're going to stand before Caesar, and I'm going to give you the lives of all the people that are with you. But there's bad things yet to come. You're going to be shipwrecked. You know, being shipwrecked in a wooden boat, in the midst of a storm that was strong enough to break a boat up, and being thrown into the sea was a scary thing. But that's what was going to happen, because he said they were going to be cast upon a certain island. There were still bad things to come. But Paul says to the people, be of good cheer, because I believe God, and we're all going to escape with our lives. Why? Because God said so. I believe God. In the midst of your storm, do you believe God? So you notice Paul wasn't praying for his deliverance. Paul wasn't praying that God would just take him out of the trouble. You know, God could have done anything. God could have stopped the storm. God could have transported Paul off the ship, taken him anywhere he wanted. There isn't anything that God couldn't have done. But Paul prayed that God would use him. And you know, God uses us in the storm. You know, Paul standing up and testifying in the midst of the storm, be of good cheer, I believe God, this is what the angel told me, and then those things came to pass. Don't you believe that the people on the ship believed in God after that? Don't you believe that there was souls saved because of how Paul responded to the storm and how he acted during the storm? But that wasn't the end of it. You know, they got cast into the sea and ended up on an island in the next chapter. And when they end up on the island, it's cold and it's raining, and the people of the island had built them a fire, if you go over to Acts chapter 28. And when Paul, since he was the prisoner, had to go gather firewood, he'd picked up a bundle of sticks, and a poisonous snake came out and bit him on the hand. Now, just think about it. Been a prisoner for 2 years. Now you've been in a storm for 14 days. Now you've been tossed and turned and thrown around, thrown into the sea, had to find your way to the island. And when you get there, you finally pick up a bundle of sticks and a snake bites you. You didn't think things could get much worse, and then a poisonous snake bites you. But Paul, in verse 5 of chapter 28, just shakes the beast off into the fire and feels no harm. Why? Because God promised him that he had to stand before Caesar. When the people of the island saw that, they thought he must be a god. And the leader of the island there, his father was sick. And Paul went and laid his hands on him and healed him in verse 8. And verse 9 says, so when this was done, others also which had disease in the island came and were healed. And don't you believe souls were saved on the island because Paul got snake bit? God was still working in the storm, through the storm, even though everything didn't happen for Paul's comfort. God was using him. See, God had a plan in the middle of the storm. God had a plan that included shipwreck, being cast into the ocean, being bit by a snake, so that souls would be saved and God would be glorified. God had a plan. Paul didn't know what the plan was, not until the angel showed up and just showed him a small piece of it. He didn't show him the whole thing. He showed him a small piece of the plan. But Paul was obedient, wanted to serve God. And he went with the plan. Now, do you believe God has a plan for your life? I do. Do you believe God has a plan for your life even in the middle of the storms of your life? I think he does. Does God always answer the way we'd like him to? No, he doesn't. Why? Because God has a bigger plan. God has a larger plan that includes glorifying his name and the salvation of souls. What do you do in the storm? Do we do what Paul did? Do we pray? Do we expect an answer? Do we receive that answer and obey? Do we ride the storm out following God's direction? Do we get excited over an unexpected event like a snake bite? Do we get excited about that? Paul didn't, because he believed God. God had a plan. Paul was part of the plan. Paul was going to stand before Caesar. The snake bite didn't change God's promises. Hold on to the promises of God during the storm. Be of good cheer. Believe God. Rest in Jesus. And God will take you through the storm. His name will be glorified and souls will be saved. God bless and thank you.